So Neil Gorsuch has finished up day two, I believe. Day two. Yesterday was day one. 11 hours of 11 hours of testimonies and his confirmation hearings. And I want to play an exchange. The best way for me to start this conversation is to play an exchange between he and Feinstein, Senator Feinstein, with regard to his position on a particular decision by the Supreme Court. And I will unpack why it's important as soon as we finish listening to the clip. Let's play the clip.
Asking you, do you agree with his statement? Yes or no?
Are the statements out of the Heller decision from the United States?
Justice Scalia's statement.
Well, whatever's in Heller is the law, and I follow the law. Well, it's not a matter of agreeing or disagreeing,
right there,
Senator, respectfully. It's a matter of it being the law. And my job is to apply and enforce the law.
All right, fair enough. Let me.
All right. I've got a lot of problems with this clip. Some of my problems with this clip are really with Feinstein, Senator Feinstein, because she was asking him about a case, Heller. This is a Supreme Court decision that really hinges on, or really deals with, rather, Supreme Court decision and the right to bear arms. And what she's trying to do in this exchange is trying to see if he's going to take the side of an unpopular decision, at least unpopular from a progressive left-leaning perspective. The problem I have with, and I believe it was Feinstein, my memory is skipping me, but the problem I have with it is that she picked a case that doesn't demonstrate what she wants to demonstrate, right? Because this is not a controversial case from from a conservative perspective, right? This is a polarizing case. This is going to make Heller, the decision with Heller has to deal with the Second Amendment, whether or not the Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms for self-defense. This is not going to be controversial. This is going to, no matter where Gorsuch falls on this, it's not controversial. It's polarizing. You're going to have people who love him. You're going to have people who hate him. But what's most important about this exchange is what Gorsuch is communicating. He's communicating this. He says it doesn't matter what he believes about the law. His job is to interpret or defend or make decisions based on the existing law. And this goes right in line with his originalist and strict constitutionalist perspective, right? That is, the Constitution is not a living, breathing document. Side note, to interpret the Second Amendment in a way that actually means that individuals can carry weapons is actually not an originalist interpretation, but I digress. We could probably have people argue about that for days, but it is in itself an example of taking liberties with a living, breathing document. But the point is this. The point is that Gorsuch and conservatives like him love to sit on their ivory tower and say, this is just the law. And I don't really have an opinion on it. I'm going to just interpret it based on what the strict letter of the law says. Here's the problem with that. And here's my problem, a second problem that I have with Feinstein, with her line of questioning. American law has not always been just. And the Constitution itself was not designed for really anyone except for white men. If you take the Constitution as it was written at the time that it was written, and you are really trying to be an originalist, then there are so many problems that would still exist today, if not for a Supreme Court who is willing to look back over the Constitution and interpret it for the times in which we live. That's number one. But the number two, there are Supreme Court decisions that have absolutely carried the weight of law that have been anything but just. And what bothers me about Feinstein is that she uses an example of a case to try to demonstrate this that is probably the worst case that you could pick, right? Nobody's going to be, shocked if he even fell on the side of the decision and say, yes, I support the right to bear arms as determined by Columbia versus Heller. Shocking. District of Columbia versus Heller. Shocking. No one's going to be shocked by that. But even in the line of questioning, his defense to his answer to her question is that I'm simply going to interpret it the way that it was written. I'm not here to determine whether a law is bad or whether a law is good or whether a Supreme Court case decision was bad or whether a Supreme Court case decision was good. And Feinstein says, okay, I'll give you that. No, don't give him that. Ask him about the Dred Scott decision. Ask him about Plessy versus Ferguson, Dred Scott decision, and Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson. No, Dred Scott. See, I'm not a legal scholar, but I pretend like I'm one. No, Dred Scott actually codified into law the dehumanization of slaves, that we were not citizens, that the Constitution was not meant for us. And this was a decision that stood for years. And people could hide behind the fact that this was a Supreme Court decision, therefore the law of the land. Plessy versus Ferguson, codified separate but equal into our law. And so anyone who says, like Gorsuch and like Scalia did, anyone who says that, oh, well, we're just going to interpret it as it is. It's not our job. It's not even interpret it. That's the wrong word. It's not our job to interpret it. It's our job to carry it out as strictly written. And if you want to expose the fallacious nature of that argument, you don't do it, Feinstein, with District of Columbia versus Heller, depending a case basically that hinges on the Second Amendment, because that's simply polarizing. People are just going to get on their sides of that argument. You do it with the case that clearly demonstrates that America, from its inception, has had unjust laws that required the Supreme Court to overturn and to interpret differently than it was written. Now, that's my problem with Feinstein, but whatever. And no, I'm not an attorney. No, but this. I'm not a senator. No, but this is pretty simple. This is pretty simple. Anyone who makes that argument, make them defend the laws that America has passed throughout its history that have been anything but just. Here's my problem with Gorsuch. He gets to present himself as this dignified, honorable man who's going to be just. In reality, he is nothing more than a person who wants to freeze America at a time that only benefited white men. I would argue white Christian men, but we'll be more specific, white men, or less specific and say white men. The reason I make that argument is because if you freeze America and you take this interpretation of the Constitution and you take previous laws or cases decided by the Supreme Court and you freeze them at the time in which they were decided and at the time in which it was written, then how else can you, how does anyone else get liberty in America except for the people the Constitution was written for? You cannot say that the Constitution was written for every person. You cannot say that we, the people, actually included slaves, actually included women. It actually included men who had property. You cannot say that it included the LGBTQ community. You cannot say that it included anyone else except the people who were represented at the time of its writing. So how? Here's the question, Senator Feinstein. How can you justify being a strict constitutionalist or an originalist when the original Constitution, as written, did not protect or enfranchise anyone but white men? I would love to know the answer. Maybe he has it rationalized out. Maybe he can actually justify being an originalist while still protecting all Americans. I would love to see it, but we won't see it because Dianne Feinstein, one, she gave up on the line of questioning, and two, the case that she used to even set this argument up was the wrong case to set this argument up. But again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a senator. I'm just a guy with a radio show and a YouTube channel.